Good morning, everybody. How you're doing today? Great. So I want just to double check if you can see both the PowerPoint and the Blackboard. All right, sounds good. All right, so today we're going to be resuming our discussion of the reproductive system. If you remember, we discussed the different component of a reproductive system. As you remember, I have two main sets of organs. We've got the main organ of the reproductive system. Those are the gonads, like the testes in males and the ovaries in females. And we've got accessory reproductive organs. And the accessory reproductive organs include the ducts, glands, and external genitalia that will aid the gonads to perform their reproductive function. We then discussed the different components of the male reproductive system. If you remember, the testis was located inside of a skin pouch called the scrotum. Above it, we've got the epididymis. And the epididymis gonna be allowing the sperms to travel up through a duct. We call this duct is my vas deferens. The vas deferens, if you remember, gonna be traveling up from the testis towards the pelvic cavity, traveling through the spermatic cord. It doesn't travel on its own, it travels along with other blood vessels, nerves. The vas deferens, if you remember, gonna be meeting with the duct of a gland, and we call this gland is my seminal vesicle. The vas deferens, along with duct of the seminal vesicle, will form together a duct that we've called the ejaculatory duct. Right and left ejaculatory ducts, remember, will be releasing the semen to the part of the urethra traveling inside of this gland. If you remember, what did we call this gland? This is going to be surrounding the neck of the bladder and the proximal region and the proximal part of the urethra. You remember, what did we call this gland on here? Prostate gland, exactly. So the two ejaculatory ducts are going to be releasing the semen to reach the prostatic urethra. Prostatic urethra will then travel outside of the prostate gland, passing through the pelvic floor, where I've got the those skeletal muscles, including the external urethral sphincter, and will pass then into the penis through its root. And if you remember, this is where I've got another gland that will be releasing its secretions prior to the ejaculation. And remember, it joins the urethra at the bulb of the root of the penis. And remember, we call this gland is my bulbourethral gland or Cooper's gland. Then the urethra gonna be traveling through one of the three erectile tubes that we have in the penis. We call this part of the urethra is the penile urethra or spongy urethra that will be allowing the semen to be released through the opening of the urethra. This is the external urethral orifice. Remember, just located posterior to the urinary bladder to the prostate gland. We've got this distal part of the colon. This is the rectum, the straight part traveling down. And the constricted part on here, this is going to be the anal canal and the opening through which the feces is going to be conducted out. This is going to be the anus. So again, important structures on here is that we need to be aware of. First, we've got testis, scrotum, epididymis, vas deferens or ductus deferens. Ductus deferens meets with a duct from a gland, and we call this gland is my seminal vesicle. Together, the duct of the seminal vesicle and the vas deferens will form the ejaculatory duct. Right and left ejaculatory duct is going to be releasing the semen to the part of the urethra traveling in the prostate gland, because this is the prostatic urethra. The urethra will then travel outside of the prostate gland, passing through the muscles of the pelvic floor. We call this is my intermediate urethra or penile urethra. If you kept going down, the urethra travels in the penis, and this is where I will get the secretions from the bulbourethral gland. The part of the urethra traveling through the penis, this is called penile urethra or spongy urethra. The opening on here of the urethra through which micturition and ejaculation going to be taking place. This is what we call the external urethral orifice. If we're looking on here, we've got a sagittal section of the testis. If you remember, the testis did have two coverings. The white covering on the outside directly adhering to the internal structures. This is my tunica albuginea. On the outside of the albuginea, we've got a covering formed of two layers. We call this is my tunica vaginalis. And in between the two layers, we've got the cavity of the tunica vaginalis. On the inside of the testis, if you remember, we've got those tubules. We call them the seminiferous tubules. This is where the spermatogenesis will be taking place. After the sperms get formed, they will be passing through a set of interconnecting ducts. Those are the rete testis. And from the rete testis, they will travel to the ducts of the epididymis. Remember, the epididymis did have three parts: head, body, and tail of the epididymis. As a continuation of the tail of the epididymis, remember, we've got the sperms traveling up through the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. Remember, vas deferens is traveling up through the spermatic cord. This is where it's going to be accompanied with the pampiniform plexus of veins, testicular artery, and other nerves. Remember, we also have seen the internal structure of the penis. Remember, the penis was formed of three segments. Those were the root, shaft, and the glans. Remember, the root is going to be formed by the crus penis and the bulb. Crus and bulb. When we have a transverse section of the penis, what we're going to see? We're going to see three erectile tubes. Two on the dorsum of the penis. Those are the corpora cavernosa. And one on the ventral side. This is going to be the corpus spongiosum. And that's why we call the urethra, where it's going to be traveling here in the corpus spongiosum. We call it spongy urethra because it travels through the corpus spongiosum. Any questions? Any questions? All right, great. So we also did discuss the gametogenesis, and the first type of gametogenesis that we've seen last class was the spermatogenesis. And if you remember, spermatogenesis is the process by which you're going to be producing sperms. Remember, the initial cells that you're going to be relying on in the formation of the sperms is going to be the spermatogonia. And a spermatogonium will be passing through a mitotic division to produce two daughter cells, which are gonna have the same exact genetic material like the mother cell. So the cells that are produced from the mitotic division are gonna resemble the gonia. We call those ones, those are the primary spermatocytes. The primary spermatocyte, if you remember, it's a diploid cell like the stem cell, like the gonia. It's a diploid cell. It has a complete genetic material. Primary spermatocyte going to be passing through another cell division, which is going to be the first phase of the meiosis. We call this first phase is meiosis 1. And remember, this is going to result in the formation of two haploid cells, but they are, each of them, if you remember, going to have two copies of half of the genetic material. So I have only half the number of chromosomes, but I have two copies of this half number. And this requires me to reduce the number of chromosomes in those cells. So each of them going to be passing through another cycle of cell division. And this is going to be my second phase of meiosis, or what we call meiosis 2. This is going to result in the formation of 4 haploid cells. Four haploid cells that will be produced from the second division in the meiosis. We call this cell that gets produced, it's my spermatid. So the first step in spermatogenesis was the mitosis. The second step was the meiosis, in which I'm transforming the spermatocyte into a spermatid. But remember, the spermatids are spherical in shape. They can't travel for long distances, so I need to modify the shape of the spermatids in order for them to be able to travel. So each spermatid won't be performing any further cell division, but I will be allowing modification of its shape. So I will be trimming the cell, modifying its shape for it to become able to travel. So I will be modifying the shape of the cells, and once this final shape is reached, we're gonna call the cell now a sperm. So sperms will have pointed apex, which is gonna be filled by digestive enzymes that will allow it to penetrate. And it has a middle region on here, which is gonna have a lot of mitochondria inside that allows it to generate lots of energy for it to be able to move. And it has a tail that will allow it to swim along the testicular fluid, along the in the semen to pass through the female reproductive canal. We call this step the last step of the spermatogenesis, in which I am modifying the spermatids into sperms. This is what we've called the spermiogenesis. And if you remember, I told you to pay attention to the difference between spermiogenesis and spermatogenesis. The spermatogenesis is a whole process, 3 steps: mitosis, meiosis, and spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is just a conformational change of the spermatids into sperms. We then discussed the really important cell that is located in the testis, which will help with the spermatogenesis. And if you remember, we call those are the Cercetory cells or sustentacular cells. A Cercetory or sustentacular cells will be providing first the nutrients and the signals which are required for the division of the spermatogonia into spermatocytes. Also, they will be responsible to dispose the excess cytoplasm that will be sloughed off the spermatids during spermiogenesis. So you see on here, when I'm trimming the cell, so I will have parts that I will not be using. So those parts that will be sloughed off the cell for me to change its shape to become a sperm, the Cercetory cells will be the ones that will be disposing this sloughed cytoplasm. A third function of the Cercetory cell or sustentacular cells will be to secrete the testicular fluid into the lumen of the sperm carrying ducts, which will allow the sperms to travel. So what's going to be the regulation of spermatogenesis? When would a person start to produce sperms? By the age of puberty, what happens? Your brain will start to produce gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. To be more specific, the part of the brain is going to be the hypothalamus. GnRH will be stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release its hormones, the gonadotropins, which are my FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So those are the gonadotropins that will be released from, again, my anterior pituitary gland. FSH and LH will have 2 different target cells. FSH will be acting on the sustentacular cells, the Cervix cells, and the LH is going to be acting on another testicular cell, which is going to be my interstitial cell. Cervix cells, under the effect of FSH, it's going to be releasing a protein called the androgen binding protein, which serves as a surface receptor for the androgen, for the male sex hormones. Compared to the interstitial cells would be releasing the male sex hormones or the androgen. In order for the spermatogonia here to start the mitotic division, primary spermatocytes to keep going with the meiosis 1 and 2, I need to have two things. I need to have male sex hormones, I need to have androgens, like the testosterone, and I need to have a receptor for this androgen on the surface of my cells. And the androgen receptor here is my androgen binding protein. For this androgen, when it binds to the surface receptor to stimulate the cell division. So again, where do I get the androgen binding protein? It's coming from the Sertoli cells or sustentacular cells. And the androgen, the sex hormone, male sex hormones, those are going to be produced from my interstitial cells. And remember again, what hormone did stimulate the Sertoli cells to produce androgen binding proteins? This is my, any idea? Which one did stimulate the Sertoli cells or sustentacular cells to release androgen binding protein? FSH. Exactly. And how about interstitial cells? What gets them stimulated to produce the androgen? The other pituitary hormone. This is my, exactly, LH, luteinizing hormone. All right, so why a person who takes supplement is at the risk? Supplements of male sex hormones. I'm taking steroid injections to build up muscles. So the main function here of the male sex hormone is to allow spermatogenesis to take place for me to produce sperms. But one of the secondary sex characteristics that will be resulting due to the presence of the androgens or the testosterone is going to be increasing the muscle bulk. So if a person is taking supplements of steroid hormones, androgens, for him to get bigger muscles, so why they take them in cycles? This is one thing, and why he is at a risk of having infertility. What do you think? Any ideas? Any ideas? So testosterone levels, he is taking testosterone from outside. So he should have more than normal levels of androgen. So those androgen should be greater. So how come having too much androgen from outside can cause infertility? My body will not be producing sperms. You see on here, you need androgen for the cells to start the division and to produce sperms. How too much is bad? Degeneration of the cells, it won't degenerate the cells, but it will slow down the activity. But who needs them? If I'm taking what they are producing from outside, why would I need them? Like, I'm taking more than enough androgens from outside. So your body will stop producing here androgens, yes, as what you're saying, but this is not going to be explaining why a person will have infertility, because if I'm not producing my own, but I'm taking supplements, they will substitute the presence of the natural androgens. Where is the problem here? So what happens if I have high levels of androgens? This will cause the inhibition, a negative feedback of the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. So I'm inhibiting their activity. But still, this doesn't explain much. So if I am inhibiting the release of both FSH and LH, do I have a problem with not producing androgens? I don't have a problem with not producing androgens because I'm already taking androgens from outside. But where is my problem? The problem is that this androgen will have nothing to bind to. Would you be able to stimulate those cells by the extrinsic androgen without having an androgen binding protein present? So if I have insulin, for example, but I don't have the insulin receptor, will this insulin has an effect on my cells? It won't. Same concept on here. So having too much androgens present will do what? Will inhibit not only the release of the androgen inside from your the internal androgen from your interstitial cells, it will also inhibit the formation of the androgen binding protein. So I don't have the receptor for the androgen to bind to, for it to have an effect on my spermatogonia for them to divide and allow the formation of sperms. Does this make sense? Any questions? Any questions? All right, so looking on here, you see I've got my GnRH that will be produced by the age of puberty. GnRH is gonadotropin releasing hormone that will be stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release both FSH and LH. If you remember, FSH acts on the Cervix cells, stimulating them to produce the androgen binding protein. On the other hand, the LH is going to be stimulating the interstitial cells to produce the androgens. And you need both the testosterone and the androgen binding protein for you to stimulate the spermatogonia to transform into sperms. All right, for the first in-class activity for today, please write this in your answers. All right, so the nurse cells that help in the development of sperms are called. What are the cells that will help? Yes, exactly. What were the three main functions of Cercetory or sustentacular cells? If you remember, I am giving nutrients, I am giving signals, and we've seen the signal now, which is the androgen binding protein to allow spermatogenesis to take place. And another function will be to dispose the cytoplasm that will be sloughed off the spermatids during spermiogenesis. And the third function of the Sertoli cells will be to produce the testicular fluid that allows the sperms to travel through the sperm carrying duct. The secondary sex characteristics due to the presence of the male sex hormones, the androgens, testosterone, will include the appearance of pubic and facial hair, deepening of the voice, and the skin becomes thicker and oily. Also, we're going to have an increase in the bone growth and its density. And if you remember, because males don't have menopause, so theoretically speaking, a person will keep producing androgens throughout his life after puberty. And this is why females are at a greater risk of developing osteoporosis compared to males. First thing, males will have dense bones throughout their life, and they don't have that severe decline in the production of androgens. Also, another secondary sex characteristic for males would be increase in the size and mass of the skeletal muscles. So again, important secondary sexual characteristics in the male is going to be appearance of pubic and facial hair, deepening of the voice, skin will become thicker and oily, increase in the density of the bones, and increase in the size and mass of the skeletal muscles. Questions? All right, so moving on to our next topic, which is going to be the anatomical structure of the female reproductive system. So if we're looking here, we will see the ovary, and the ovaries, this is where the formation of the eggs will be taking place. Those eggs that once ovulated, they will be picked up by those finger-like projections coming from the tube. We call this as the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. That uterine tube, if you see on here, will be conducting this egg, if it gets fertilized, all the way to the uterus. If you see here, the uterus has a dome-shaped apex. We call this as the fundus. A middle region, which is called the body of the uterus, and the part of the uterus that travels down, passing inside the vaginal canal. We call this as the cervix. So again, three parts that we can see here. From this sagittal section of the uterus, we can see the fundus, body, and the lower portion of the uterus traveling inside the vaginal canal. This is the cervix. If we're looking down, the vagina will have a mucous membrane that will be covering parts of the external opening of the vaginal canal. We call this membrane is the hymen. Located posterior to the vaginal opening, we've got the Bartholin's gland. Bartholin's gland that will be releasing its secretions to reduce the friction and to allow the lubrication during intercourse. Located anterior to the vaginal opening, we've got the external urethral orifice, which is the opening of the urethra. And if you see on here, this is the urethra traveling down from the urinary bladder, conducting the urine to the outside. And located anterior to the external urethral orifice, we've got this erectile tube, which is going to be projecting to the outside. This erectile tissue, which is going to be the clitoris. The clitoris is the corresponding organ to the penis in males, like the corpora cavernosa in the penis in males. Located posterior to the vaginal opening and the Bartholin's gland, we can see the anus. Above it, we've got the anal canal, which will be conducting the feces down from the straight part of the colon. This is the rectum. Something that makes sense when you see this diagram is that pregnant women will have frequency and urgency, so they will go more often to the restroom. They can't hold the urine inside the urinary bladder as they are used to before pregnancy, because simply the uterus will be applying pressure, reducing the available space to store the urine. All right, so anterior to the uterus, we've got the urinary bladder, and anterior to the urinary bladder, we've got here, this is the pubic symphysis or the symphysis pubis. Important ligaments on here that we can see include the suspensory ligament that will be holding the fallopian tube, round ligaments that will be attaching the uterus to the anterior abdominal wall, as you see on here, and posteriorly the uterus is going to be attached to the sacrum by the uterosacral ligament. Uterosacral ligament is this ligament that will be attaching the uterus on one side and the posterior pelvic wall on the other side. If you notice on here, as the cervix is traveling down into the vaginal canal, it's going to be surrounded by space. So posteriorly, we call the space, it's the posterior fornix. Anteriorly, we call this as the anterior fornix. So you see on here, this is going to be the posterior fornix, which is the space behind the cervix in the vaginal canal, and the space in front of the cervix inside the vaginal canal. This is going to be the anterior fornix. Questions? Any questions? So again, what we're looking at in here, we've got the ovary, we've got the fallopian or uterine tube, we've got the uterus. The uterus, as you see, has a dome-shaped part. This is a fundus. A middle region, it's called the body of the uterus, and the part of the uterus that travels inside the vaginal canal, this is the cervix. Anterior to the cervix, inside the vaginal canal, we've got this space. This is the anterior fornix. Posterior to it is going to be the posterior fornix. The vagina opens up to the outside, and the outside is going to be covered with the mucous membrane. On here, we call this as the hymen. Posterior to the vaginal opening, we've got the Bartholin's gland. Anterior to the vaginal opening, we've got the external urethral orifice, which is the opening of the urethra on here, through which the urine is going to be conducted down from the urinary bladder out. Anterior to the external urethral orifice, we've got the erectile tissue on here that will be protruding to the outside, which corresponds to the male penis. We call this as the clitoris. Posterior to the uterus, we've got the rectum, and posterior to the lower part of the vagina, we've got the anal canal and its opening, the anus. If you notice on here, important ligaments that we should be aware of, ligaments that will be holding the tube in its place. It's called the suspensory ligament of the ovary, and it's going to be also attached to the tube. and the round ligaments that will be attaching the uterus to the anterior abdominal pelvic wall, and the uterosacral ligaments that will be attaching the uterus backward to the posterior pelvic wall. If you notice on here, the Bartholin's gland, the vaginal opening, external urethral orifice, and clitoris are going to be surrounded by two lips. The mucous membrane on the inside, the mucous membrane lip on here is going to be the labia minus or labia minora, and a skin fold on the outside of it, this is going to be the labia majus or labia majora. Questions? All right, so this is going to be a 10 stars diagram for our upcoming lab exam. 10 stars diagram. If we're looking on here to an anterior view of the female reproductive organs, what we can see on here, first we can see the ovary, and those finger-like projections coming out from the tubes that will be picking up the ovulated eggs, those are called my fimbriae. The entrance here of the tube, it's called the infundibulum. The infundibulum is this part of the tube where you're gonna be allowing the ovulated egg to drop. Then we're gonna have the bulging part of the uterine tube. This bulging part on here is what we call the ampulla. And we're gonna see the connection between the uterine tube and the uterus to connect the cavity of the tube to the endometrial cavity. We call this connection is my isthmus. So again, if we're looking here at the fallopian tube, we'll see a direct connection between the ovary and the tube. We got those finger-like projections coming out, and the motility here of those finger-like projections is what allows the fallopian tube to pick up the ovulated egg. Those again are called my fimbriae. The entrance here of the fallopian tube is what we call the infundibulum. The tube has a bulging part here. We call this the ampulla. And the part of the tube that will be connected to the endometrial cavity this is called the isthmus. All right, those are the important parts of the fallopian or uterine tube on here that we're looking at. Looking at the three main portions of the uterus, remember we've got this dome-shaped part of the uterus. This is called the fundus. We've got this middle region of the uterus on here. This is what we call the body of the uterus. And we've got the part of the uterus that travels down in the vaginal canal. And we call this is the cervix. If we're looking at the wall of the uterus, we can see I have three main layers. On the inside, the internal layer, the most internal layer, this is called the endometrium. Endo means inside. Then I have the muscle layer, smooth muscles. This is my myometrium. Myo means muscle, of metrio means uterus. So inside the uterus is endometrium. Muscles of the uterus are going to be forming a layer called the myometrium. And surrounding my uterus, we're going to have the outside layer. This is called the perimetrium. Peri means around, and metrio is a uterus. So again, if we're looking at the layers building up the uterus, you can see on here. On the outside, we've got the layer around the uterus. So we call this is my perimetrium. We've got the muscle layer underneath it. We call this is the muscle of the uterus, myometrium. And we've got the internal lining of the uterus. This is my endometrium, inside of the uterus. Questions? All right, so we're looking here at the different parts of the cervix, which is again the part of the uterus that travels down in the vaginal canal, we can see that the uterus has the cervix, has an opening that connects it to the endometrial cavity. We call this the internal os, and the opening that connects the cervix to the vaginal canal, this is going to be the external os. And on both sides of the cervix, we've got those spaces around the cervix, but on the sides, those are going to be the lateral fornices. All right, so again, what we're looking at in here, we're looking at the different layers of the uterus, of the wall of the uterus. We've got the perimetrium, myometrium, and endometrium on the inside. We're looking here at the structure of the cervix. We've got the internal opening of the cervix that connects it to the endometrial cavity. This is going to be the internal os. The external opening of the cervix that connects it to the vaginal canal. This is going to be external os. And in between the internal and external os, we've got the cervical canal. On both sides of the cervix, inside the vaginal canal, we've got the lateral fornices. If you remember, back when we've seen this view, remember we've got, this is the anterior fornix, and this was the posterior fornix. So on the sides of the cervix, on both sides of the cervix, you've got the lateral fornices. Questions? All right, so we can have a break for 10. We're gonna come back, see more, discuss more about the structure of the anatomy of the female reproductive system. Also, we're gonna be discussing the menstrual cycle, ovarian cycle, and oogenesis, which is gonna be the essay question for your upcoming lab exam. All right, for Francois, yes, you can still take the sample quiz. The sample quiz will still be available throughout this week. So if you didn't complete it, go ahead and get it completed before you start the actual exam. So the actual exam is now available for you to complete. Again, in order for you to complete those proctored exams, you can't simply go through the Canvas. You need to go through smarter proctoring because you will see an access code which is required. So simply, in order for you to complete the exam, you need to enter the code, but you don't have this code. So what smarter proctoring is doing is going to be allowing you to access the exam by entering the code for you. All right. Any other questions? Any questions? All right, we'll see you in 10. All right, welcome back. We have been discussing the different parts of the female reproductive system. So we've seen here the different parts of the fallopian tube. We've seen the fimbriae, we've seen the infundibulum, we've seen the ampulla, and we've seen the isthmus. We've seen three parts of the uterus, if you remember. Those were my fundus, body, and the cervix. Three main parts that we need to know here in the cervix. We've got the internal os, external os, and the cervical canal. Remember, we've got a space around the cervix in the vaginal canal. We called the lateral spaces here on both sides of the cervix. Those are the lateral fornices. If we're looking here at the wall of the uterus, we've got three layers. Those were my endometrial cavity, endometrium, I'm sorry, on the inside. We've got the muscle layer on here. This is my myometrium. And surrounding the uterus from outside, this is my perimetrium. Looking now at the different ligaments that will be holding those reproductive organs in their place. You see on here, we've got the round ligament. We've got a sheet-like ligament on here that will be partly surrounding the fallopian tube, partly surrounding the ovary, and also it's going to be surrounding the uterus. So we call this as a broad ligament. Broad ligament has three parts, if you see on here: mesosalpinx. Meso is a ligament, and salpinx means the tube, the fallopian tube. They are part of the broad ligaments that will be surrounding the ovary. We call this as my mesovarium. And the part that will be surrounding the uterus is my mesometrium. On both sides, holding the cervix in its place, holding the cervix to the surrounding pelvic wall. This is going to be my cardinal ligament or the lateral cervical ligament. The one is going to be holding the ovary along with the tube on here. This is going to be the suspensory ligaments that we've seen in the previous slide on here. This is my suspensory ligament. This is the round ligament on here. This is how this is going to look like in a 3D model. It's going to be attaching the uterus to the anterior abdominal wall, like this. If I'm removing the rectum, you can see here, this is going to be the uterosacral ligaments that will be attaching the uterus to the sacrum. Okay, this is my round ligament. And if you notice on here, on both sides, should have the cardinal ligaments that will be attaching the cervix to the pelvic walls. Questions? Any questions? All right, so this is going to be our next 10 stars diagram for the upcoming lab exams. This is highly important. It's a must be on your exam, along with this one, along with the other male reproductive system diagram, male reproductive system diagram. Moving on to our main topic today. This is going to be the oogenesis, folliculogenesis, and the menstrual cycle. But I just want you to focus here. Just forget about taking notes right now. Just pay close attention with me. All right, starting first with the oogenesis. Now, what is oogenesis? Oo is the egg, and genesis means formation. The egg formation, oogenesis. Like the spermatogenesis was the production of the sperms. Here, oogenesis is the production of the egg. If you remember, when we studied the spermatogenesis, we started by stem cells. Stem cell is what we called in spermatogenesis. This is can you remind me, please? What was the stem cell for spermatogenesis? Spermatogonia. Spermatogonium. And spermatogonia did pass through a mitotic cell division. I am passing through mitosis. And this is going to result in the formation of, if you remember, primary spermatocyte. Remember, primary spermatocyte is going to be passing through first phase of meiosis, which is meiosis 1. This results in the formation of secondary spermatocyte. Secondary spermatocytes will be performing the second cell division of the meiosis, which is meiosis 2. This will allow you to form spermatids, which will have only half of the genetic material. This is the haploid cells that we're gonna be modifying the shape to become a sperm. Is there any difference in terms of genetic material between the spermatid and the sperm? What do you think? Any difference in the genetic content? No, it's gonna be the same. It's gonna be the same. When all this is gonna be taking place, mitotic division, meiosis 1, meiosis 2, when all this takes place, all the time, after puberty. During puberty, what happens? The GnRH is going to be released, stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH and LH. FSH stimulates the Cervix cells to release the androgen-binding protein, and the LH stimulates the interstitial cells to release the androgens or the testosterone, which is the male sex hormone. So all this is going to be taking place all the time after puberty. All the time. Whenever I need to produce sperms, this will be taking place. Let's have a look at the oogonia, the oogenesis. Again, I start with the stem cells. This is my oogonium, like the spermatogonium on here. We've got this time an oogonium. This is my stem cell. It's a diploid cell. It's going to be dividing by a mitotic division. So I'm performing mitosis. This results in the formation of primary here, like this mitosis of the spermatogonium did allow you to form a primary spermatocyte, but this time this will allow formation of a primary oocyte. Primary oocyte is gonna look similar to the gonium, still have the same diploid genetic material. I am still a diploid cell. Primary oocyte passes through the first phase of meiosis, meiosis 1, and this results in the formation of the secondary oocyte, which has only half of the genetic material. But remember, yes, I have half of the genetic material in terms of information. I have half the number of chromosomes, but I have 2 copies of this half number of chromosomes. So inside the cell, yes, I have half of the genetic information, but I have 2 copies of this half of the genetic information. Secondary oocyte is going to need to pass through another cycle of cell division. Remember, this is called meiosis 2, and meiosis 2 will allow the reduction of the number of chromosomes of the secondary oocyte for you to become a mature egg, which is called the ovum. This is a mature egg. So if you notice on here, it's almost the same like in spermatogenesis. We started by a gonium that will be performing mitosis for you to form a primary site. And primary site passes through meiosis 1. This will allow you to form a secondary site. Secondary sites will need to pass through the second phase of meiosis, which is gonna be allowing you to form a mature egg, which is the ovum. Any questions? Any questions so far? All right, so when all those steps gonna be taking place, not all the time, like in males, not all the time. The mitotic division that allows the transformation of the oogonium into a primary oocyte only takes place during fetal life. Only during fetal life. So what happens after a female is born? No more formation of primary oocytes. So a female is born with a certain number of primary oocytes which are kept in her ovaries. She can't increase the number of primary oocytes available after birth. So only during fetal life, the oogonia will be performing a mitotic division for it to produce a primary oocyte. What happens to those primary oocytes? Primary oocytes gonna be kept as primary oocytes until when? Until puberty. Each month after puberty, what happens? One of the primary oocytes will be able to complete meiosis 1, the one which will be kept in the dominant follicle. So again, what happens in here? You've got an oogonia. It's going to be dividing by a mitotic division during fetal life, so no more mitosis after birth. Primary oocyte is going to be performing and completing meiosis 1 when at its turn after puberty. So let's say I have thousands and thousands of primary oocytes. Each month after puberty, the number is going to be reduced. Each month after puberty, what happens again? The primary oocyte in the dominant follicle will be able to complete meiosis 1, and this is the egg that gets ovulated. This ovulated egg, is this a mature egg that can be fertilized? Is it a mature egg? Is it a mature egg? It's not yet a mature egg. When will it become a mature egg? Only if it gets penetrated by sperm. So the secondary oocyte, it's not a mature egg yet. It needs to be penetrated by a sperm, and the sperm penetration of the secondary oocyte is what's going to be enhancing the secondary oocyte to complete the second phase of meiosis to become a mature ovum, which nucleus is going to be able to fuse with the nucleus of the sperm and allow the fertilization and the zygote formation. All right, I don't understand, Joseph, your question. Which one is the immature? Which one is immature? Which one is a mature egg? Which one is a mature egg again? is the ovum. Can I have an ovum present without having sperm? No. Unless penetrated, which is the very first phase of fertilization. All right, so the secondary oocyte will not become a mature ovum unless it gets penetrated by sperm, and the penetration is a very initial phase of the fertilization. All right, questions? Why they can't keep producing eggs? So theoretically speaking, if a female didn't have a menopause, so she will be at a greater risk of developing homeostatic imbalances, including endometrial carcinoma, breast cancer. And this is why breast cancer risk factor, one of the breast cancer risk factors is early menses and late menopause. So if I have unlimited number of primary oocytes at each month, I can have a cycle. So this means that this female won't have menopause, and theoretically speaking, if this happens, this female is going to be at a much greater risk of developing a carcinoma. Does this answer your question, Michelle? All right, so why males don't have menopause compared to females? They have menopause. Why do you think? Why males won't have menopause, but females will have menopause? Because this mitosis in males gonna be taking place all the time, compared to the mitosis here is taking place only during fetal life in females. So this means I have unlimited production of primary spermatocytes, compared to here I have limited number of primary oocytes. So this limited number of primary oocytes, when depleted, this is what results in menopause. All right, make sense? For Joanna, secondary oocytes will not go through meiosis 2 unless it gets penetrated by sperm. Yes, this is correct. Yes. So it won't complete the second phase of meiosis unless it gets penetrated by sperm. In other words, you won't have a mature egg unless the primary oocyte gets penetrated by sperm. Easy. What do we call this process again? The formation of an egg? Oogenesis. Oogenesis. All right, so what happens each month after puberty? So now this is the very first menses after puberty. So what we're looking at in here is going to be what kind of egg is kept inside the ovaries, what kind of egg is kept inside the ovary waiting to become mature egg, what eggs are kept in the ovary again, see on here, primary oocytes. Primary oocytes. This is a type of eggs. So primary oocytes. Primary oocytes. This is a type of eggs that will be kept inside the ovaries until puberty. And by the time of puberty, if it will be the egg that gets ovulated, this primary oocyte will become a secondary oocyte. So again, what is the type of eggs kept in the ovary? I need more responses here. What is the type of egg kept in the ovary? Primary oocyte, not just oocyte, primary oocyte. The primary oocytes are not going to be kept free in the ovary. They will be surrounded by follicular cells. So again, the type of eggs that I have in here is a primary oocyte, which gonna be surrounded by squamous follicular cells. One row of flat cells surrounding the primary oocyte. What do we call all this together, both the primary oocyte and the surrounding flat follicular cells? We call those are my primordial follicle. So again, how the primary oocytes are gonna be kept in the ovary? The primary oocytes are kept surrounded by flat cells, one row of flat cells, and together the primary oocyte and those flat cells surrounding it, they are called a primordial follicle. What happens by the time of puberty? Your brain, your hypothalamus to be more specific, it's gonna start to release the gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. If you remember, GnRH, when we studied the spermatogenesis regulation, GnRH, it was stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release what? Do you remember what are the two hormones that will be released from the anterior pituitary gland under the effect of GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone? FSH and LH, exactly. So inside the ovary, you've got the follicles. And what is the type of follicles that is kept in the ovaries? This is gonna be the primordial follicle. Each month after puberty, what happens? The hypothalamus gonna be releasing large amounts of GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, that will be stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release both FSH and LH. What we're focusing on right now is the FSH. What FSH stands for? What FSH stands for? Follicle stimulating hormone. Exactly. Why did we call it follicle stimulating hormone? Because when we first described its function, we discovered that it stimulates, guess what? The follicle. So FSH will stimulate few of those primordial follicles kept in the ovary. Few of those primordial follicles will become stimulated. The follicular cells will start to grow. So now what kind of egg do you think is going to be kept in a follicle in which the follicular cells are going to become cuboidal like this? Rather than squamous, the follicular cells will become cuboidal. Secondary oocyte, right? Secondary? Is it secondary or primary or ovum? What do you think? Secondary oocyte. Can you go back here to the oogenesis? When you're gonna allow the primary oocyte to become a secondary oocyte by the time of ovulation. Ovulation. All this is gonna be taking place during puberty. Only the ones that will be ovulated will be allowed to complete meiosis 1. So what kind of egg do I have in here? Inside this follicle. If I'm inside this follicle, this means the egg was not ovulated. It's still inside the follicle. The follicle didn't rupture, it didn't release the egg, so it's still before ovulation. So if I am kept in a follicle like this, so what kind of egg do I have in here? I'm still before ovulation. I didn't have an ovulation of the egg, still a primary oocyte. Still a primary oocyte. Why there is a change outside? This is due to the effect of the FSH. The FSH gonna be stimulating the follicle maturation. We call it the folliculogenesis. Folliculogenesis is the formation of the follicle. So you did start with a primordial follicle. Under the effect of FSH, as it rises each month, what's gonna happen? Some of those primordial follicles will become primary follicles. What kind of egg do I have inside a primary follicle? I still have the same primary oocyte. What's gonna happen after that? The primary follicle, still under the effect of FSH, the primary follicle will be so let me draw this. Gaining multiple layers of follicular cells, which are cuboidal to columnar cells like this. So rather than having only one row of follicular cells under the effect of FSH, the follicular cells will be proliferating, and I will have more than one layer of follicular cells around the egg. So what do we call this follicle on here, which you have more than one layer of follicular cells surrounding the egg? This is my secondary follicle. Did I rupture the follicle? Did I release the egg outside? Not yet. So I still did not ovulate the egg. So what kind of egg do I have in here? Inside the secondary follicle, I still have a primary oocyte. One of the growing follicles will be gaining extra layers, will become the dominant follicle. So you're not maturing only one follicle at a time, you're gonna be activating, enhancing the maturation of more than one, many of them. Only one will become the dominant follicle, the mature follicle, in which you're gonna have multiple layers of follicular cells. And we're gonna see that some of the follicular cells will be broken down and will form a space filled by fluids. This is called the antrum. What kind of egg do I still have in here? What kind of egg do I still have in here? The egg was still not ovulated. So we call this is still my primary oocyte. What do we call this follicle? It's the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle. What is the pituitary hormone that is responsible for this to take place? Again, this is my FSH. FSH will be stimulating a number of primordial follicles each month after puberty, enhancing their maturation. Only one follicle will become the dominant follicle that will become the mature or the Graafian follicle. Again, in all those follicles, what kind of egg do I have? In all those follicles, what kind of egg do I have? Primary oocyte. Primary oocyte. What happens? All those growing follicles gonna be releasing a hormone called the estrogen. Especially the mature follicle. Mature follicle gonna be releasing large amounts of estrogen. All right. Large amounts of estrogen released from the mature follicle will be stimulating the hypothalamus to release GnRH as well as the anterior pituitary gland to release large amounts of LH this time, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is the one that's going to be responsible for the mid-cyclic changes. So LH, it will rise suddenly. I have an LH surge, a sudden rise of the LH levels. And why did I have this LH surge again? Because this was a positive feedback due to the release of large amounts of estrogen from the mature follicle. This LH surge results in what? Results in enhancing the primary oocyte to complete meiosis 1 to become a secondary oocyte. It enhances the mature follicle to accumulate more fluid, and this will cause this mature follicle to rupture. And as it ruptures, it's gonna be releasing the egg. The release of the egg is what we call the ovulation. So if you notice on here, this was the mature follicle. Under the effect of the LH surge, the sudden rise of the luteinizing hormone, this follicle gonna be rupturing, releasing the secondary oocyte now. What did enhance again the maturation of the primary oocyte into a secondary oocyte? It's the LH surge. So LH effects, first one is going to be maturation of primary into secondary oocyte, rupture of the Graafian follicle to allow ovulation to take place, and what's going to happen to those remaining follicular cells after I ovulate the egg, after I release the egg outside of the mature or the Graafian follicle? The remaining cells will be called the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is the yellow body. Corpus luteum is the yellow body that will be formed after the rupture of the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle. So again, what are the three effects of the LH surge? We've got first one, maturation of the primary oocyte into a secondary oocyte. Again, primary oocyte into secondary oocyte. This means you did complete the first phase of the meiosis. And this is the egg that will be ovulated. Again, why? Because the same triggering factors that enhance the maturation of the primary oocyte into secondary oocyte is the same ones that triggered the rupture of the mature follicle, allowing ovulation to take place. So the ones that will become a secondary oocyte is the ones that gets ovulated. What is the third effect of LH surge? Again, the remaining follicular cells after the ovulation of the egg will be forming a yellow body. We call this yellow body is the corpus luteum. Easy, easy. Questions? Any questions so far? So change between the primordial and mature, is that menopause or just occurs after puberty? This is going to be taking place each month after puberty until menopause. After menopause, why menopause takes place? Because simply a person won't have any more primordial follicles for them to become mature. So I have, let's say, 5 primordial follicles. So this means if I am using one each month, what this means I won't have any more primordial follicles within 5 months. So after 5 months, I will have menopause. Again, those are not actual numbers. This is just to give to allow you to understand the idea here. All right. So yellow body, we're gonna see its function in a second. We're gonna see its function in a second. The corpus luteum. All right. Did this answer your question, Michelle? So all those steps gonna be taking place each month after puberty until menopause. Why it won't happen after menopause? Because simply I don't have any more primordial follicles for them to mature. And you see on here, why do I have a drop in the estrogen levels after menopause? Because where do you get the estrogen? Where do you get the estrogen from? The estrogen is released from those maturing follicles, not from the eggs, from the maturing follicles. See on here, those primordial follicles which are growing, becoming a primary follicle, secondary follicle, Graafian follicles, those are the ones that will be producing the estrogen. So if I don't have any more primordial follicles because they got depleted over time, will I be able to produce estrogen? What do you think? If I don't have growing follicles, no. All right. Questions of what we've discussed so far? So to Mary, what is the function of the corpus luteum? Corpus luteum is going to be responsible to produce the second type of ovarian hormones. What was the first ovarian hormones that we've seen? It's the estrogen, which is going to be produced from the growing follicles. Primordial follicle becoming a primary follicle, becoming a secondary follicle, becoming a mature follicle. Those are producing estrogen. Corpus luteum is going to be producing another type of ovarian hormones. It's called the progesterone. Pro means before, and gestation means pregnancy. So the corpus luteum is going to be releasing a hormone, and we figured out that this hormone is going to be rising before gestation, before a female gets pregnant. Progesterone. Again, why does it precede gestation? Why does it come before pregnancy? Because simply you see on here, when would you have pregnancy? After ovulation. And when would you get a corpus luteum? Once the egg is ovulated. So the hormones that gets released again from the corpus luteum is going to be the progesterone. What is the effect of the progesterone on here? Progesterone will have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, which is the opposite of what we've seen with the estrogen. If you remember, estrogen was gonna be stimulating the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland to release LH. But the progesterone released from the corpus luteum will have, on the other hand, a negative feedback. It's gonna be inhibiting the release of GnRH and so the FSH and LH. So again, what is the effect here of the corpus luteum formation? It's going to be releasing progesterone, and this progesterone will be inhibiting the release of FSH and LH. So would I be able to grow another follicle? What do you think? No. If you have just ovulated an egg, you can't grow another follicle. You can't stimulate another follicle. Why? Because of the negative feedback effect of the progesterone that gets released from the corpus luteum. So what's going to happen to this corpus luteum? Corpus luteum going to remain in the ovary for 14 days. If the egg was not fertilized. If the egg was not fertilized, what's going to happen to this egg if it didn't have a sperm that penetrated? It will not complete the second phase of meiosis. And as it won't complete the second phase of meiosis, I won't need it anymore. So this egg, if it's not penetrated by a sperm, it's going to be passing through cell atresia. It's going to be degenerated. Also, this corpus luteum will be degenerated within 14 days. So what happens to the level of progesterone if you degenerate the corpus luteum after 14 days? If I don't have any more corpus luteum, what's going to happen to the progesterone levels? What do you think? If I told you corpus luteum is producing progesterone, if I told you that I will break down the corpus luteum, what's going to happen to the progesterone levels? Will decrease, exactly. I have a drop in the progesterone levels. And as I have a drop in the progesterone levels, what's going to happen to this negative feedback of the progesterone that I don't have anymore? Will decrease. I will decrease the negative feedback. So what's going to happen to the levels of GnRH? If I don't have inhibition, because I don't have progesterone, GnRH will be rising. And as I increase the GnRH levels, what's going to happen to the FSH? FSH will be released. And as you release FSH, what's going to happen to the primordial follicle? Another set of primordial follicles in the ovary will become primary follicles, will become secondary follicles. One of them will become the dominant follicle, which will become a mature follicle. Again, those growing follicles are going to be releasing what ovarian hormone? Estrogen. Especially the mature follicle going to be releasing large amounts of estrogen, which will have a positive feedback stimulating the anterior pituitary gland to release large amounts of LH, luteinizing hormone. We call this sudden rise of LH is the LH surge. What's going to happen to this mature follicle again? Under the effect of LH, it's going to rupture, and the primary oocyte kept inside this follicle will be allowed to complete meiosis 1. So now it becomes a secondary oocyte that gets ovulated. What happens to the follicular cells that were surrounding this egg? They will be forming the corpus luteum. What's going to be released? What ovarian hormone gets released from the corpus luteum again? It's the progesterone. And the progesterone, it's going to be inhibiting the release of FSH and GnRH. This causes a drop in all pituitary gland hormones. Until when would you have this inhibition? Until it gets degenerated. Again, when the corpus luteum will be degenerated, it becomes degenerated within 14 days if no fertilization takes place. What happens after you degenerate the corpus luteum? You're gonna lose this negative inhibition, this negative feedback. I don't have inhibition, so what's gonna happen? GnRH gets released from the pituitary gland, stimulating the pituitary gland to release FSH. FSH will enhance the maturation of other follicles that will be releasing estrogen. Estrogen will have a positive feedback on my hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland, stimulating them to release LH. Luteinizing hormone will stimulate the mature follicle to rupture, enhancing the formation of a corpus luteum, allowing ovulation to take place, and allowing the primary oocyte to complete meiosis 1. And what's going to happen next? Corpus luteum is going to remain in the ovary if no fertilization takes place for 14 days, releasing progesterone, which will inhibit the pituitary gland hormones. What happens when it degenerates? You restart the cycle. So all this is going to be taking place every month after puberty. All right, so moving, looking at the questions on here. Is this clear for everybody first before I answer the questions? You see, the end of the cycle is the one that stimulates the formation of a new cycle. So what happens at the end of the cycle is drop in the progesterone levels. Drop in the progesterone levels is what's going to be stimulating the release of GnRH, FSH to start a new cycle. All right, so let's have some questions on here. What about when someone have twins? It's according to whether they are identical twins or not. So if they are identical twins, the zygote that will be formed, it was one cell, and this cell splits into 2 cells, and then 4 cells, and so on, to form the morula and stuff. All right, what if those cells have been separated like this from one another? So each one will form a baby on its own. It was a single cell, 1 sperm, 1 egg, and during the proliferation of this fertilized egg, the cells got separated, forming 2 clusters of cells that will give rise to 2 separate babies. Those are the identical twins. For twins which are not identical, so most likely this will take place if a person had difficulty getting a child. They will be taking medications to enhance ovulation. So as normally you should be getting 1 egg ovulated each month. But because of the effect of the medication, the ovulation will be greatly enhanced. So you're going to have more eggs ovulated than normal. And as more eggs ovulated than normal, multiple eggs get fertilized, and those will be given rise to multiple babies. Twins, but are not identical twins. For Joanna, is progesterone what they have on the birth control? Yes. So some of the birth control pills, like called mini pills, those are going to be taken progesterone, just pure progesterone. And there is many other birth control pills. So one of them is the mini pills that we use here. Progesterone is going to be inhibiting the GnRH release, FSH release. So I make sure here to not have any ovulation taking place, any maturation of further follicles. Is it possible to have two primary oocytes in one mature follicle? I didn't hear about it. I need to double check it. I'm not sure, but I don't believe so. Questions? All right, so briefly reviewing what we've discussed so far. Again, what kind of eggs a person keeps in her ovaries? Again, what kind of eggs do a person keeps in her ovaries? Primary oocytes. And again, primary oocytes are going to be surrounded by one row of flat cells. Those are the follicular cells. We call both the follicular cells along with the egg, it's a follicle. We call this follicle, in which the primary oocyte is surrounded by, here, is surrounded by one row of flat cells. This is my primordial follicle. Again, each month after puberty, what's going to happen? The hypothalamus is going to be stimulating the release of FSH from the anterior pituitary gland. FSH will do what? Will stimulate some of the primordial follicles kept in the ovary, and this will enhance the maturation of those primordial follicles, first into primary follicles, in which I have one row of cuboidal cells surrounding the primary oocyte. Because this is my primary follicle. And again, what kind of egg I still have in a primary follicle? Still a primary oocyte. Still under the effect of FSH, the primary oocyte will, the primary follicle will become a secondary follicle, but still the egg inside the secondary follicle is a primary oocyte. So secondary follicle will gain other layers of cuboidal cells around the primary oocyte. So I have multiple cell layers of follicular cells surrounding the primary oocyte. This is going to be my, again, secondary follicle. You can have multiple primary follicles, you can have multiple secondary follicles, but only one dominant follicle that will be the mature or the Graafian follicle. We'll see here, cells are coalescing together, they are fusing together, forming an antrum, which is filled by fluid on here. And the egg inside the mature follicle is gonna still be a primary oocyte. What happens at this point? Again, this is my mature follicle. What happens at this point? Those growing follicles are gonna be releasing an ovarian hormone called the estrogen. The mature follicle is gonna be releasing large amounts of estrogen. This large amounts of estrogen will be stimulating the hypothalamus to release more GnRH that will cause the stimulation of the anterior pituitary gland to release, this time, another pituitary gland hormone, which is the LH. We call this is the LH surge. What's going to be the effect of the LH surge again? It's going to be enhancing the rupture of the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle. Allowing the release of, this time, the secondary oocyte. Again, what did enhance the primary oocyte to complete meiosis 1 to become a secondary oocyte is the LH surge. So again, effects of LH surge. First one is the maturation of primary oocyte into a secondary oocyte, enhancing the Graafian follicle to rupture, allowing ovulation to take place. And the third effect on here will be the maturation of those follicular cells to form the corpus luteum. Until when we're gonna keep the corpus luteum? The corpus luteum is gonna remain for 14 days inside the ovary if no fertilization of this egg takes place. No fertilization, the corpus luteum is going to remain in the ovary for 14 days. Corpus luteum is going to be responsible to release another ovarian hormone that precedes gestation. We call it progesterone. Pro before gestation pregnancy. This is a hormone that rises before pregnancy. What is the effect of the progesterone? Progesterone is going to be inhibiting the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland hormones. It will have a negative feedback. Again, what was the effect of estrogen? It had a positive feedback. What happens after 14 days? The corpus luteum degenerates. And as it degenerates, what's going to happen? I will have a drop in the progesterone levels. And I will have an inhibition of its negative feedback. This what stimulates another cycle to start. Hypothalamus will start to become activated another time as I don't have progesterone anymore. So it's going to be releasing GnRH that will enhance the anterior pituitary gland to start again to release FSH that stimulates another set of primordial follicles that will become mature. One of them will become the mature or the dominant follicle that will be releasing again large amounts of estrogen, which will have a positive feedback, and this positive feedback will enhance the anterior pituitary gland to release large amounts of LH. We call it LH surge. 3 events that will be taking place. Maturation of primary into secondary oocyte, ovulation, and corpus luteum formation. Corpus luteum is going to be releasing again what hormone from the ovary is going to be responsible to release progesterone. This progesterone will have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Any question? Any questions so far? All right, so all what we've mentioned here is called the ovarian cycle. Those are the cyclic changes that are taking place inside the ovary. Those changes taking place inside the ovary altogether is what we call the ovarian cycle. Primordial to become a primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature follicle, to become the corpus luteum as it ruptures. All this is the ovarian cycle. How the ovarian cycle changes can affect the uterus. If you remember, what are the 3 layers of the wall of the uterus? Endometrium on the inside, endometrial lining, and the muscle layer. This is the myometrium, and surrounding the uterus from outside, this is my perimetrium, right? So you've got endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium. So looking here, what we're concerned with is the endometrial changes, the changes that takes place in the endometrium inside the uterus. So again, what we're looking at in here, we've got a primordial follicle or multiple ones, follicles, that will become primary follicles, that will become secondary follicles. What all those growing follicles are releasing, again, along with the mature follicle, they are releasing estrogen. If we're looking at the endometrium, we're gonna see that it has two layers. It has a layer at the base that does not change in response to the ovarian changes. We call this is the stratum basalis, or the basal layer. And on top of it, you're gonna have a layer which changes its thickness in response to the ovarian changes. We call this is the stratum functionalis, or the functional layer. What happens under the effect of the estrogen? As the estrogen gets released during the maturation of the follicle, the estrogen will be stimulating the stratum basalis to build up the stratum functionalis. So you would see that there is an increase in the thickness of the endometrial lining. So here we're looking at the lining of the uterus. So this was a lining when we first started. Estrogen levels, as they are rising due to the maturation of the growing follicles, you're gonna be increasing the thickness of the stratum functionalis, building up blood vessels, building up glands in the endometrium, that will be responsible to create the secretions needed for the baby to be supplied. So what do we call the phase of the menstrual cycle here, or the uterine cycle, during which I am increasing the thickness of the endometrium by increasing the thickness of the stratum functionalis? We call this phase of the uterine cycle, it's the proliferative phase. Why? Because simply this is when you're gonna have the proliferation of the endometrial lining taking place. Until when would I have estrogen? Until when would I have estrogen? Until I don't have any more growing follicles, which will be taking place when again? Once you've got an ovulation. So after the LH surge, if you remember, LH surge enhances the mature follicle to rupture, and now you don't have any follicle anymore. You're gonna have a corpus luteum, which gonna be releasing another ovarian hormone, which is the progesterone. So until day 14 of the cycle, by day 14, you've got the LH surge, you've got the ovulation taking place. I don't have any more estrogen, but I have instead the hormone that precedes gestation, that precedes pregnancy, which is the progesterone. What happens after you stop the release or reduce the release of estrogen, and now you are releasing large amounts of progesterone? This will also enhance the proliferation a little bit, but the main thing is that it will be engorging the blood vessels in the endometrial lining of the stratum functionalis and fill them with blood. It's going to be stimulating the endometrial glands and will enhance them to release large amounts of secretions. So now, you see, I have a major increase in the thickness of the endometrium. So before the maturation of the egg, this was the thickness of the strata of the endometrium. I did have almost only stratum basalis, the basal layer. After the release of estrogen and progesterone, this is going to be the thickness of the endometrial lining. So what happened to the thickness of the endometrium? Under the effect of estrogen and progesterone, it has increased in thickness. We call this phase in which I am stimulating the glands to secrete their secretions. I'm engorging the blood vessels with blood. We call this is the secretory phase of the menstrual cycle. Why did we call this as the progesterone? Because I am increasing the thickness, I am filling the glands with secretions, I'm engorging the blood vessels, I fill them with blood for me to create a suitable environment where the fetus is gonna get implanted. All right, so I need to get the endometrium ready for implantation to take place. Why? Because I did just have an ovulation. I did just release a secondary oocyte. So if it meets a sperm, a fertilization might take place. And as fertilization takes place, I need to have a suitable endometrial lining to which this fertilized egg or the zygote now it's going to be able to get implanted. We call this phase is my secretory phase. What happens next? What if no fertilization takes place? If no fertilization takes place, what's going to happen to the estrogen, to the corpus luteum? What's going to happen to the corpus luteum? If no fertilization takes place, what's going to happen to the corpus luteum, and after how long? It degenerates within 14 days. So secretory phase has to be for 14 days. It's going to be constant in each female. This phase is going to remain 14 days. This is the luteal phase of the corresponding to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. No changes. This is when I got a corpus luteum remaining in the ovary before it degenerates. This is going to be constant in all females. What happens after you degenerate the corpus luteum? What's going to happen to the progesterone levels? When you degenerate the corpus luteum, what happens to the progesterone levels? Drop. I have a major drop in the progesterone. And what was the effect of the progesterone again? Was it a negative feedback or a positive feedback on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland? Was it a negative feedback or a positive feedback? It's a negative feedback. So what is the ovarian hormones that I have in here after I just degenerate the corpus luteum? When I just degenerate the corpus luteum, what do you think? Do I have estrogen? I just degenerated the corpus luteum. Do I have estrogen? No. Do I have progesterone? No. I don't have neither estrogen or progesterone. And why would I need estrogen and progesterone? Either to build up the endometrial lining or to enhance the secretion and making it stable. So if I don't have any more ovarian hormones, what's going to happen? I will have no ovarian hormonal support. So what's going to happen in this case? The endometrial lining will start to degenerate. This will cause the shedding of the endometrium. And we call this phase of the uterine or the menstrual cycle. This is the menstrual phase, where when the shedding of the endometrium gonna be taking place, and there will be the menstrual blood flow. Again, why did I have the shedding of the endometrium? Because simply the corpus luteum was releasing progesterone that inhibited the release of the estrogen. But now I don't have any more progesterone release as I degenerated the corpus luteum. So I have a drop in all ovarian hormones. So there will be neither estrogen or progesterone here to support the endometrial lining. So if there is no ovarian hormonal support to the endometrial lining will be shedding, allowing the menstrual blood flow to take place. So the shedding here of the endometrium, is going to be taking place during the first phase of the menstrual cycle, which is the menstrual phase. And this is going to be between day 1 to day 4. After day 4, from 4 to 14, is going to be the proliferative phase. And from 14 to day 28 of the menstrual cycle, it's going to be the secretory phase. Again, what is the hormone that I have during the menstrual phase of the uterine cycle? What ovarian hormone do I have? What ovarian hormone do I have during the menstrual phase? None. I neither have estrogen or progesterone, no ovarian support, and this no ovarian hormonal support. So this will result in shedding of the endometrium. How about the proliferative phase? What is the ovarian hormone that enhances the proliferation of the stratum functionalis? It's my estrogen. Exactly. After day 14 of the cycle, what happens again? You've got the LH surge, ovulation takes place, corpus luteum will be formed, you're gonna be releasing progesterone, and the progesterone is gonna be enhancing the proliferation, but also is gonna be filling the glands with secretions, is gonna be engorging the blood vessels and fills them with blood. We call this phase is the secretory phase. And again, ovarian hormone responsible for secretory phase is my progesterone. For how long will the secretory phase takes place? It's going to be taking place for 14 days. Why? Because simply corpus luteum, if there was no fertilization, it's going to remain in the ovary for 14 days. All right. Questions? All right, so for today activity, please. So this is a set. We've got only one multiple choice question so far. So it's gonna be an essay here. Please describe or mention here the phases of the menstrual cycle. So there's going to be 2, 3, and 4. We've got 3 phases. Next question is going to be mention the steps of oogenesis. All right, so you've got mitosis taking place during fetal life. You've got meiosis 1 that will be completed by the time of ovulation. You've got meiosis 2 that won't be completed until the end, until the egg gets penetrated by sperm. All right, so those are the things that you need to complete for the in-class activity for today. Again, like what we did agree on, you are completing those assigned. One is, it was mentioned at the beginning of class. It was a multiple choice question at the beginning of class. So if I did mention anything about the metabolism lab handout, right now it won't make any sense for you. All right, I'm waiting until might be the end of this week when we at least start to discuss this a little